Welcome to the Easier Said podcast. Today we have Kerry Herbine. He is James Bond of all things, man of mystery. I met Kerry a year and a half ago. Welcome, Kerry.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Brock and I here with Kerry. I met Kerry about a year and a half ago. He intrigued me right away, mostly because of his intelligence. He's a very smart man. A lot of wisdom to offer, and he's going to rebuff all of this because he's also very humble.
I will rebuff all of that. I consider you a friend, and that is an honor for me. So I'm excited to talk to you under any circumstance, Nick.
I'm thrilled that you're here. When I invited you to the podcast, when I invited you or asked if you'd be willing to come talk to us, I mentioned that you were one of the first names that I had thought of when we were first compiling a list of guests. And I was kind of hoping that we could find some time in your busy schedule to actually get you here. It felt like kind of a pipe dream at the time. So I'm really excited that you're here. We wanted to get you in before you moved. So I know you have some opportunities elsewhere. And so we're really glad that you're here and we can get you for an hour.
Excited to be here.
Yeah. Like I said, we met about a year and a half ago. We did some business counseling with you, did some leadership counseling training. And that's kind of where I got first introduced to your methods and ideas on effective organizational leadership, not just organizational leadership in that it translates to like normal everyday life, kind of making you a better person. Like it's kind of a all-encompassing thing is what I gathered. Not only will it make your organization or your business better, but it's just something that we should all do in our everyday lives. Behave this kind of way that you're going to help us learn about. So that's what I would like to talk to you about mostly, get you to introduce our audience to this really interesting and full of wisdom leadership method that you practice where you go. I know you've got a ton of work history, so we'll try to delve in and get as much as we can in just an hour. I know it's not an hour-long conversation, but that's kind of the goal here, to soak as much knowledge from you as we can. First, you can tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, your family, if you'd like, how you came to Lewis County, what brought you here. Just introduce yourself to us.
You know, I'm 58, and I appreciate the kind words. Experience makes you look smarter than you actually are. So, it's sort of a broken road that brought us here. We're grateful we're in Loudville in this area. We fell in love with it, and we're moving on to Kansas with gratitude in our hearts, my wife Janice and I, and this has been a great experience. So a great learning experience too, and we have 4 kids. We've been married for 28 years, and Janice is the love of my life. She's my best friend. I am very, very fortunate to be married to her, and it's a testament to her tolerance and patience mostly. And as through the years, we've grown closer together, and that path and track isn't easy. And I appreciate what you said before about better understanding yourself, and that is what I try to help other leaders with. Help them become more aware of themselves so they can put their better self forward and help the people around them and create an environment where the people around them flourish. And there's no better expression of love, I think. And that is what I try to do. It's about the striving, thankfully, that's meaningful, because I'm still so far away from that. I think the effort and the striving is what matters. And thankfully, Janice feels the same way, philosophically and faith. And that binds us. And that binds how we raise our 4 children. They're grown now. Jack, our youngest, is 20. He lives with us now, still. But that's really the common thread on how we've parented. And imperfectly so, but our kids know we love them. Hopefully every day they feel that from us, and it provides space for grace where they forgive our foibles and our imperfections. And leadership's a lot like that. So I love talking about my family. It really defines who I am. And I have a family that I don't deserve. And, we've lived apart now as our kids have grown, and we moved from Arizona to here. And what we are learning is technology is wonderful, like your great studio setup. We use FaceTime, and it is possible, we're learning, to stay connected. And our family, it requires intention and thought, and the connection can continue, and the relationship can continue to bind. And we have 2 grandchildren now, and it's, we see our grandchildren daily on FaceTime, and it would be, I can't imagine not having that technology. So yeah, just happy to be here. I would, and just, Brock, it's great spending time with you.
Yeah.
Just Nick, I'm here because I would do anything for you. And I know, I feel that from you.
Yeah.
And I am equally grateful to know you.
Yeah, it's definitely a very mutual feeling. You would be one of the, people in my life that when they spoke, there's no option but to listen. So
I feel the same when you speak.
Give me a couple of years before you say that.
No.
I wanted to just say something about the process of striving and maybe not doing as well as you thought as your life goes on. It seems like that's what the virtue is, because if it came easy and everything was all right, it's not virtuous to pursue it.
I think that is key, and I think that keeps my feet on the ground and keeps me striving and keeps me appropriately humble. And you don't want to take that too far and self-loathe, but I think that there is a sweet spot there, that part of the striving is to find that sweet spot. And I find I oscillate back and forth on both sides of that, maybe a little too prideful, and then I'll swing back and go past that sweet spot of humility and get into self-loathing. And through the years, I've narrowed that band on either side. And, a mistake for me would be outside of that band. And it happens a lot. It's part of the human condition. But to recognize it quicker is part of, for me, good striving, and own up to it.
When you say a mistake would be outside of that band, what does that look like for you?
For me, it usually looks like emotion getting the best of me, and I won't be as thoughtful, and I'll express too soon or too much. And that is nearly every time that I will be outside of that band. And I just need to be restrained, talk less, listen more, and be thoughtful and intentional. And for me, there's a lot of faith-based doctrine around that notion that I'm wildly interested in. And I am constantly searching for that sweet spot and different ways of thinking about it, different ways of looking at it, so I can best be as close to that space for as long a period of time as possible. But it's hard.
Yeah. Slow to speak, quick to listen. Is that the space?
That is
very generalization of the idea. But I've heard you talk about this concept within an organizational structure like a business, when you're in charge or you have some leadership, some authority. I would be interested to hear you for once talk about how you practice this in your parenting. this, I've heard a lot about business, not much about on the parenting end. Tell us like what experience you have practicing this method in your everyday parenting life. Your kids are older now, so maybe you can go back a few years, or maybe, it's just as much an application nowadays, whatever you think.
It evolves as your children get older. I've found, when your children are young, you're more directive. You don't want them to touch a hot stove. So you say, don't touch the stove, it's hot. And you're teaching them boundaries so they're safe. And it is directive. And as our children aged and as they have gotten older, it moves from being more directive to less. And now our children are 27, our oldest Hannah, and Will's 26, Grace is 23, Jack's 20. Now it's more, I won't offer advice unless I'm asked. And that is really restrained space. And Jack was at school, and now he's taking classes online. He is with us now, which is a great blessing. I'm trying to hold to that with him physically in our house. He's awesome. It's a miracle he's with us. And I failed there, but it's still the boundary of he needs to ask, or it will be ineffective. And we have great kids. They ask. There's nothing better than one of our children asking. I mean, it's such a gift. And I learn more from that conversation that ensues than I could ever offer up. And, I grew up in a household where I didn't ask, and it was just a different environment. I cherish a family environment where our children would ask. Jack and I had a conversation last night, and he listens. I try to be as good a listener as he is. He will listen, he will wait, he will think, and he will respond. And that is an extraordinary skill for anybody, for a 20-year-old in particular. And he has no idea how much I learn from him every time we interact. And it's those little and significant things.
Yeah, wow. What is the summary of your leadership style? If you had to summarize your leadership style, could you do that?
I think I could. I think it's about the environment you create. When I was a leader at first, a little over 30 years ago, I was very directive and I was very results oriented and worked with a great group of people, and we would produce the results. But it was really unsustainable. It created an environment that was particularly intense, and stress that came along with that made it unsustainable. And I was a failing leader in that sense. So I think it's paramount for a leader to strive, because it's in the striving again, like parenting, to strive to create the best environment that people feel safest and the most comfortable, because then they'll inspire themselves almost. And then with my influence and hopefully inspiration, they will generate just great work. They will love to be there. They will love to support the people around them. It's all about taking care of your teammates. And I work in a healthcare system. It's about taking care of teammates, patients, and residents. So for leaders and leaders I'm responsible for, it's about creating that environment where they feel comfortable to thrive. And it is that simple. it's all the pressures around that get in the way, and it is very difficult. But that's where I concentrate my effort and work to make the environment safe and fertile, fertile ground for them to enrich themselves and to ask if they need help, whether it's me or ask a teammate. I always preach almost about teaching the right guiding principles so they manage themselves. Because it's all about identifying the right people that are talented, bring them in, and create an environment where they'll almost manage themselves.
Right.
So you said that before you were able, in the prior management style that you mentioned from a long time ago, sounds like most businesses, most systems, whether it's healthcare or private business, I assume, I think I feel safe saying that most businesses are run ineffectively on the human side of things. A lot of workers are unhappy. A lot of bosses aren't happy. But in that, I don't know. I doubt that was the essence of you just knowing who you are. I doubt that's what your workplaces were like. I'm sure there was still some level of, like they were more happy working for you in your system than they were elsewhere, because I can't imagine you creating a bad workplace. But you said you were able to get results in that system. Do you find that the results in your modern system are better, or they're the same and it's just more about relationships and humanism? Or are the results also better? Are you not squeezing out even better results, but kind of, is that what's happening? Are the results better now too?
It's a great thought and question. The results are better and they're more sustainable. And there's an old leadership axiom, don't control results, influence thinking. And it really hits that. The results have been better over time. I look at those, I track them analytically, and it is more sustainable. And I agree with what you said, that it is predominant that perhaps most environments, leaders are trying to control results, and it's mostly through pressure and stress. So I understand it, but if I get paid to do anything, it would be to fight that stress internally to create an environment where people excel. And then it creates a family, and it is relationship-based. And we're supposed to look after one another. So it's aligned with who I want to be, who I'm trying to be. And it just all clicks. And it is why my work is fulfilling. It's because of that. It's because of the relationships that develop through time from those shared values and common effort. It is very binding, and that leads to enhanced performance and sustainability.
Yeah, that's huge. Sustainability is an important component there. So it's a worthy investment for managers or people in leadership positions in the workplace to value.
It is, because you're not compromising even short-term results. A lot of leaders will say, well, I need this, in particular for for-profit companies if they're under quarterly pressure, publicly traded companies, and I've worked for a couple of those, enormous quarterly pressure to deliver results. There is no short-term compromise having the long view there. Mm-hmm. You get instant feedback that sustains, that the environment produces results.
So give us a word. So instead of pressure and stress, you're utilizing
emotional intelligence.
Emotional intelligence.
And it's all environment. In a lot of organizations, I've worked for one here, they'll talk about, well, those are soft skills. And it's really, I may have mentioned this before. I worked for a company, a really good organization in Arizona. But the first week I was there, I needed paper clips. I needed 4 paper clips. it's silly that I would remember this, but
It's a big ask. Yeah.
I went to, it was an assistant manager. I said, where do I get the paper clips? And she said I needed to go down the hall and see another teammate, and I had to sign out 4 paper clips. They were in a locked cabinet. And that tells you a lot about the organization and the environment. And it was all well intended. Similarly, when you hear soft skills and they're being identified as such, it's really an organization, one of those predominant organizations that are command and control based, because it's not, it almost makes it sound you're weak. You know, when I grew up in a household where my dad was iron fist, and, you know, there was weakness to expressing yourself, what was in your heart, and, you know, it was generational.
Yeah.
And organizations are lagging there, and they unfortunately sometimes can identify themselves using those code words like, oh, there's soft skills, don't worry about that, or yeah, that's the new thing that leaders, and it's not, it's faith-based. It's, you know, I am trying to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, and it's through that ideal where it aligns with what we're talking about with work and with parenting. And it happens to be great for work. But, and we've been in leadership meetings together, Nick. You know, I don't say those words because of the organization. You know, you can't say faith-based and
Right.
But it's all the principles and ideals that are, you know, I'm building who I am. I'm 58, but the process should never stop. That's who I am and who I'm trying to be. That's really what I'm sharing in those meetings.
Yeah, that's very evident. I have 2 very different experiences from listening to your training and counseling. I have the private counseling where the faith was a part of it because it was a space where that was okay. And then in the workplace, obviously, you have to kind of keep that a little separate. But I've been in on those meetings too. So I've seen you talk about it where you bring in the faith verbally, and I've seen you talk about it in meetings where you don't share that side as much, but it doesn't matter because me being the person seeing the 2 perspectives, it was evident right away that there's something in the room working through the things that you're saying. And it was just extremely evident that the fuel behind why you preach this, why you teach this, the way that your method in leadership, there's a source to it. And the source is goodness, and that comes from the Lord. And the people in the room, just seeing a unity, and I don't remember being in those meetings and seeing a disengaged person in the room. I mean, we're talking 20 people in some of those meetings. So something was definitely working there, and you didn't have to say it. So, and that was really interesting for me, and I noticed that, having those 2 perspectives. So it's really interesting that you say that. Yeah.
Well, and I appreciate you saying that. The only thing I need to do in that meeting is get out of the way. And they're great people, and you were a great contributor in those meetings. They made the meeting.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, I did not make those meetings. I said very little. I got out of my own way imperfectly, and then they made the meeting and they felt comfortable enough to share what was really on their mind and what was really in their heart at work. And they have an environment where they help each other, and they do. And, you know, if I could hang my hat on any one thing, it would be that there's an environment where they can help each other to get better. Mm-hmm. And that is what it's all about. And that is, it's the source of truth.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not the source. I can be an imperfect conduit at times. And usually that means a lot less than more.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I sat in the back of the room at those meetings, so I don't know how much I really contributed. Yeah. Something that I struggle with, or it's not a struggle, it's more of a challenge, running my business, is knowing the line between being nice and effectively leading. I subscribe to your style of leadership heavily. I don't see any way that anybody could ever keep a business longer than a few weeks treating people poorly. I don't get it. I look at businesses like that and I don't understand how they're still around. Something I'm missing. I don't know. But I couldn't see myself running a business that way. I wouldn't feel good. I would be constantly stressed out. You wouldn't keep employees. You wouldn't keep team members. I innately kind of relate to this method that I've heard you talk so much about. And what you do so well is put it into words. What some of us feel and what we try to emulate in our business, you put into words really well. So anyway, something that I find challenging is finding that balance between being nice and being an effective leader. When I lead, I would like to be nice. I would like to convey goodness and all the things that we're talking about here. So one thing managers, leaders, whether it's business, life, marriage, parenting, whatever, could do, the probably one of the first steps they should take if they hear this and think, oh, I want to get better too, is identify where you go when you start to fall short. Is it anger? Is it this over competitiveness? Is it sadness? Like how do you react to an adverse event when it comes to leadership? Insubordination or whatever. What is your flaw? You and me would be probably impatience and anger, probably. I don't know if I'm framing that correctly. Other people, it might be, they shut down, they get discouraged. Discouragement is probably a huge one. So identify like what happens to you, so you know it's happening, and you can start to take steps to like stop and write it down instead, or write it down for your weekly meeting instead. Like how did you get to a point where you could develop self-restraint? Just discipline, enforcing it, or was it practiced over time? What do people do when they start to what's the next step once they recognize this is what I do, now what do I do?
It is first recognizing it and then talking with people to gather information to understand what's a way I can deal with this and be a more effective human being and be a more effective leader in this case, to better meet my responsibilities with the people I work with. And yeah, it's just, for me, it took me some time to start asking. It requires humility, and I'm constantly working on that. And I think asking people you trust, and then you can put those pieces of information together however you want. You get to decide that. And through time, I'm learning how to do that better and better for me. And everybody's different. That's why I love when my children will ask me for something, because I anticipate they'll take 5% of what I say, and it's their choice to discard the other 95, and I trust them that didn't apply in that situation. And if it's 5%, that's a lot. They'll take that, and if they have friends they trust, other adults, an environment where they feel comfortable pulling that information, the same principles apply at work. And that's what I'm trying to do. You're never at a point where you feel past that, certainly, or better than anyone else, certainly. Mm-hmm. If I put a great effort forth each day, it's that way. And that's how I can be better for the people I work with. It's all imperfect, but that effort is noticeable, fortunately, and it builds trust of the people you work with. They'll see that and see, wow, he's really trying. I'm going to give him grace on his imperfections, and I trust him You know, if you'd ask anyone I work with, the one thing I'd want them to say, and I'm sure, you know, the batting average always needs to get better. It's, I know he'd take a bullet for me.
Yeah.
That's huge. Wow.
You know, if I could get there with everyone I'm responsible for and work with, that's the sweet spot at work.
Wow.
Because then they're in a real rich environment to grow best for them, whatever that looks like for them. And I'm on a good path.
Yeah. Everybody should ask themselves that question.
Yeah.
That'll give you a good marker for how you're doing.
Yeah. And it's usually, you know, hearing that feedback's for me hard because you're not, you know, it goes back to being competitive and a perfectionist because I'm not measuring up. You know, it's hard to hear critical feedback, and, you know, I hear it every day, deservedly. But that means the teammate felt comfortable to tell me, because, you know, that's hard. It's hard to offer the feedback. And if they see me hear it and try to change, and that is a loving accommodation, is what I call it. And lovingly accommodate, that honors them better than anything I could think of. You know, and I'm big on, it goes back to command and control versus creating an environment. We all get to choose however we live. And I feel so strongly it is important I honor that at work. It's important I honor it everywhere, but I have authority at work. I have been the recipient of fantastic leaders. And when I've been the recipient of less than that, it has always been because of infringement on that fundamental principle. I want to, and that's part of creating a safe environment, I want to make sure each teammate feels empowered to decide for themselves whatever they need to decide. And that's hard to create that environment because I know how to do that for myself, but I need to know and understand what that would take with each of you. And that is my sacred responsibility. And that requires a lot of mutual understanding, mutual trust, and a lot of work on my part. And that is, for me, the job. You know, and it's a great job. Mm-hmm. But that's my job as a husband and as a father. And, you know, my children give me a pass on my imperfections, mostly because they see me trying to do that and trying to get better. You know, hopefully they'll say, well, he was really, you know, impassioned 15, 20 years ago, and he's still impassioned, but hopefully they would say he's a little more restrained than he was. But, you know, they get to decide that for themselves. So I don't know if that answers it, but
yeah.
I think that a lot of the leadership styles, when you look around, and I've had varying ranges of employers, and you can tell who kind of adopts a lot of these things because you feel welcome, you feel encouraged, you have the same vision, you are more excited to go to work, you're in a better mood, which rubs off on your employees, and then you bounce off each other and grow that way. And you can see when the restrictive nature of some leaders takes all of that away instantaneously. And immediately you feel bitter and you want to complain and you're resentful about not being able to get, you know, tacks if you want them, or, you know, or push pins. And so, yeah, I completely agree with all of that. And I'm pretty much just sitting over here being a sponge because in my own life, for my own leadership avenues, I feel like these are a lot of things I want to work on and really adopt into my life with my family and my business. But let's take a quick break. We went a little bit over, but that's because it was so good. And I just got to reset a camera, and we'll be right back.
All right, we're back.
Can I jump in?
Yeah,
and we talked about moving. It's interesting. I am task oriented, so it goes back to being the perfectionist and being competitive. I want to get the task done. I want to make a commitment, which a task is a commitment made, and I want to meet the commitment. You know, my word matters. But that can, if I have 8 things I need to get done, like a move, you have some dozens and hundreds of things that need to get done. That creates anxiety for me and for most people. It would be, I think that's, I think a lot about and how to better manage. That creates stress. That's a stressor. To have accumulation of things you know you need to get done that are, particularly when they're specific. And there is a way to map those things out and get them done that can alleviate the stress. And we talked about my wife. I've seen my wife do that very effectively, how she conducts herself generally, and in particular with moving. She will, and I try to apply those principles at work. She will map out tasks. It's give us this day our daily bread. Don't worry about tomorrow. Let tomorrow worry about tomorrow. She knows what she needs to get done today. She knows there's 47 other things she has to get done the rest of the week, but they're all mapped out throughout the week. And yeah, we feel stress and anxiety with moving, with the new opportunity, but the physical moving stress it's manageable because of those things. And I learned from my wife there. And, we've moved around quite a bit, and I've watched her over the years, and that's really where writing things down that come up developmentally with teammates, that's really where that came from. Wow. Instead of me attacking it from a task-oriented mindset, because I appreciate what you said earlier about anger. And I'm not really angry in that moment, but it will be received that I'm angry because I'm just so impassioned. I'm expressive by nature. I'm impassioned by nature. I'm competitive. I'm a perfectionist. If I attack this developmental issue or attack a task, it will usually almost always be received as I am very angry or upset or frustrated. And most of the time, I'm just really focused. And I know you share this, Nick. I'm really focused on getting this one thing done the best way it can get done.
Yep.
And I constantly fight that. It is very difficult. That's my blind spot. Mm-hmm. And that it really encompasses my blind spot. And it comes in a lot of different forms, but that's really the root. So I think about that a lot. And, I'm very good at fooling myself into thinking that's not my blind spot when something comes up, and then I'll misstep.
Yeah.
And that's the internal wrestle.
So I think that kind of segues us nicely into this concept that you coined for me called assuming intent. So tell us a little bit about when you hit that moment where you have to tackle an issue, whether it's in the moment or it's a long-term issue with a teammate, an employee, whatever relationship you're dealing with at the time, where it would be very easy to assume why the dysfunction is occurring. Can you tell us a little about how to avoid that?
That's key.
I feel like it's the key. I feel like it's the glue.
It is.
That's a lot of times it's the glue to this whole theory that you have. So yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
And a way to think about it for me, where I start to think about it in particular situations, is labels. I try to stay away from labels. So as soon as I say you're something, whether it's identifying or labeling a behavior or what I think you may be thinking, as soon as I label that, I have surrendered and landed that that's what it is in my mind. And I am almost always wrong. Mm-hmm. I am almost always wrong. And when I first realized that, I moved into space of trying to figure out, well, am I right or am I wrong as I'm thinking that? And that's wasted energy. I shouldn't label.
No matter what.
No matter what.
Even if you were right, no matter what.
Especially if you're right.
Right.
Because who cares?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. And, the labeling then leads to characterizing, and that's bearing false witness. So,
right.
And that festers.
It does.
The next time that something might arise with that individual, you think you have it pegged, and maybe this time you don't, and maybe you call it out the wrong way and sever that relationship. So I think that's, I need a notebook.
Hard.
I need a notebook over here for.
I think that is the hardest thing. I think that if people could have a key takeaway from this conversation, the assuming intent issue would be something to really work hard on. I think it's probably the hardest, aside from maybe realizing your flaws and knowing how to, that's kind of starting this process by realizing your flaws and counteracting those, is getting away from assuming that why people behave the way that they behave, why they make the mistakes that they do, why they forget this, this email didn't get sent off on time, this order didn't get done on time. You don't know at all why those things occurred. And that is probably the hardest thing to adjust in our minds, is that you don't know why these things happen, and you should not assume. And if you can get to the point where you're not assuming that you know why these things happened, then you're already off to a better start. But that's kind of where it starts.
You're in that sweet spot. Yeah. That's right. And emotions for me get in the way of that. And you're right, Brock. It leads to bias, and then ultimately prejudice, and that's not loving your neighbor. And I'm too often in that space. I just want to recognize it and lessen it, and ultimately try to prevent it. I'm pretty certain I'll never get there, but I'm never going to stop trying. And you're right. That's where you're assuming what's motivating someone. I'll never be smart enough to know. I just want to create an environment where someone will tell me, and where they feel comfortable telling me honestly why, without repercussion, without adverse consequence, in particular at work. Another thing I would want teammates I work with to say is, I could tell them anything. I could yell at him. I could tell him he's awful. You let me down here because of this. That's good space, because they feel comfortable enough to tell me that, and then I can receive it and do my job better and create a better environment for them. It's just invaluable feedback. It just takes so much trust. And I have enormous respect for you, Nick, for so many reasons. And I've mentioned this. You have a capacity to receive feedback that is beyond your years. I mean, I cannot receive feedback. It's not a contest. I have work to do there. You remind me of my son, Jack, and that is an enormous strength. And, there's restraint. That's a great trait that I think comes along with it. Pausing. And I think that is fundamental to being a better person. And it's part of my blind spot. The reflex to get something done, or the reflex when something's not the way I know it could be. Well, who am I to decide that? At work, I'm responsible for output and results, but that's just not the way to get there. So surround yourself with great people, and don't assume what their intent is ever.
Is there ever a time where this process, this leadership style, that your relationship between you and the folks that you're in charge of, the team, where it's jiving and it's working, and you receive some feedback on some systems and processes that aren't working but you are almost, you feel confident that they need to work. Like, this is not something that can change. So how do you, tell us about a good strategy for receiving feedback where the answer might not necessarily be yes, like, okay, we'll make a change, or is there always room for change? This receiving feedback, you're having this conversation, you're not assuming intent. Why didn't this get done? Why, to your kids, why didn't you take out the trash? Well, I can't remember to do it on Tuesdays, whatever. Well, it just needs to get done. What do you do when the answer is still needs to happen?
What great looks like in that situation, and sometimes it's tough to attain, is if you're talking with your child, you'd want to help them arrive at that conclusion that, yeah, I'm responsible for the trash and I didn't take it out and I'm committed to taking it out. That's what great looks like. And you're right. All too often that is tough to get to in that moment. So you do the best you can to get closer and then work on it the next time as best you can. If you have someone that you're aligned, the same guiding principles, and they want to do well and they're trying, then it's up to you as a parent or you as a leader to be patient. It's hard. For me, it goes back to my blind spot. It requires patience, and it's hard. But if you think about it, it goes to your question of results and short-term results, long-term results. Does this lead to better results? It does, because when you think about the alternative, if I'm impatient, and I have been too many times, if I'm impatient and I'm too critical in that moment with that teammate, it is going to hinder their performance until I collect myself really and get on better footing with them. And that's the part I mostly ignored and didn't take responsibility for. I'm responsible for all of that. I need to measure that and do better. And for me, that's doing the right thing. It's hard in those moments, though. It's hard to be patient when it could be somewhere, and it could be somewhere today, but that's just not, life's just imperfect. And if they're trying, if they're engaged and you're working with the child or a teammate, it's our responsibility to be patient. Real tough. Real tough.
People over systems.
People over systems, yeah. And I'm a systems process person.
Right.
You make sure those are in place and you continuously improve those. And I do think, to your question, you had a good thought. You do not land with that. There's your environment, the competitive environmental change, the workplace changes, demand changes, customer demand, patient demand. That is always dynamic. So systems and processes always need to be examined and improved and revamped. And it's the same principles that apply to environment. It's so precious, the environment, that I could create a great environment and mess it up 5 minutes from now. And it just always needs to be tended to. It's any relationship. And it's usually asking for forgiveness from a mistake I made and moving forward, and hopefully have that environment where grace is provided.
Yeah. So people operate differently. What advice would you have for people who are thinking about this and saying to themselves, I have X amount of people who are systems people. I've got X amount of people here who are not systems people. How do I motivate everybody to get in line with this process that this business needs to run? It's people over systems, but there is a system. So how do we motivate people to kind of come into alignment and see a common vision when we're all so different?
It's a false choice. You need both desperately. I think of systems and processes as the track. You have to have a track, and the team needs to know the track. They need to know where it is and what direction it's heading. And that's really the system and the processes, the mechanics of the minute-by-minute work. That is essential. You have to have that. And you have to have the environment by which you go as fast as you can, as best as you can, for that's sustainable for as long as you can on that track. So it's about talking and sharing those ideas and ideals that it's a false choice. We need both. And we need everyone together at the table, working together, hashing out differences and doing the work together, and appreciating that diversity, because it's essential. There's so many other dynamics there, but you're right. There is that wrestle, in the command and control versus, influencing thinking and creating that environment, those soft skills. You need all of it.
This is where weekly meetings would come in handy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, you attended some of those over and over again. We just, there's so much pressure and anxiety with the work in and of itself. We need to have, and we do it 45 minutes or less each week, a moment in time where we all can come together. It's not even required. Hopefully it's an environment they want to come, share what's going on. And in that sharing, we're reminding ourselves of that, that it takes all of it. And then we go back and we're recharged.
Yeah, this is applicable to parenting too. There was a time when my wife and I were discussing how often we correct our children throughout the day. And my wife had the brilliant idea of, what if you just banked it and had one conversation at the end of the day? And I thought that would be a lot nicer. Like, that would help me with my temper throughout the day if I knew, you don't got to get mad right now. We'll just talk about this later. So I would feel better throughout the day, but also, like, maybe it would be more effective, like, instead of correcting your child every time they do something, which is going to be constant throughout the day if you let it, just having a relationship with your kid throughout the day instead of correcting them all the time. And then you sit down with them. If they're, they're 5, 6 years old, they can actually have a conversation with you. Then you sit down with them at the end of the night and you say, hey, like, today I noticed that you really seem to struggle with this particular thing. Like, you want to tell me about it? And that is way more productive for them, instead of, when it happened, being, hey, stop that. They get nothing out of that.
I think
there's like, this is a perfect, this applies to parenting so much. This is such a great concept.
And I think you're right. As they get older and grow, you're really showing them restraint without even talking about it, which is, I think, infinitely more powerful. You're showing them intentional parenting without talking about it. You're showing them thoughtfulness, and those are great expressions of love. Yeah, and they'll respond to that. And I've failed our children most of the time that way through their upbringing. Children have an amazing capacity to forgive.
They do.
And it's a great example for me not to assign intent and not to label. And, it's why the Lord loves little children. They don't have the baggage I've accumulated. And, I see that in Jack, in the conversation we had yesterday. He's just so extraordinarily pure. Children are pure. They don't have that lifetime of accumulation of things that are less than good. And I think what you described there is a way to help them cope and offload those things daily. Mm-hmm. And it's modeling exceptional behavior.
Yeah, the assuming intent thing, it brings us, if you can master that as much as you can master it, that it brings a certain level of zen to your management. I mean, it lightens your heart, takes the burden. Like, it's not fun to feel like, it's not fun when you make these assumptions about why people behave, because they're usually not good. They're usually pretty negative assumptions.
They are.
And that is a burden on your heart. Like, you don't feel very good when you get into a repetitive pattern of treating people that way. It doesn't feel good. So that's a benefit too. If you can do your best to avoid seeing people in this negative way, because that's how it's going to be when you assume intent. It's likely going to be not positive. The lightening of your own heart, I mean, you will benefit from it too, and it will bring a certain level of peace, and you'll maybe enjoy your parenting a little more. You'll enjoy your own business a little more, but it'll create this environment, this calming effect for the people around you. But yeah, it's good for you too. It's therapy for yourself. It's something that you should try to do for your own heart, I would say.
I think that is very true. And, that helps me as a parent, helps me as a husband, helps me as a leader be better as a result. And there's no question it's peaceful. It makes me think of, if I'm in an environment where it's more command and control, if I'm personally in that environment and I'm trying to build the environment we're talking about, there is an inherent conflict there where you could get accused of, you're not engaged, you're not urgent, you don't take the initiative because it's nearly stress-free. And that's something to fight. And I've seen that. I've seen that, and we talk about that a lot in our Friday meetings. I'm trying to arm and empower the leaders I work with that, hey, this is a likely event and it's a likely challenge you're going to be confronted with. It just helps them deal and cope with that and stay on the track that they know's best. And you're right, it's best for them. It's best for their internal spirituality. It's best for their internal emotional health, their psychological health. And we work hard to get people off of that unintentionally. And I love talking about it because it helps us recognize it, and then we're in a position to help each other stay out of that space. I need as much help, if not more, staying out of that, because I am very good at, if I'm assuming intent, it is usually less than positive, and I can do that quickly, and that's not good. And, I would want you to pull me out of that space. I worked with a great teammate in Arizona, Eve Cardiff, and love her, trust her. And she was a nurse leader and ultimately the leader of a very big radiology department. And she would, if I was in that space, she would come up to me, hold my arm and say, "Are you okay?" And that was her way, lovingly. It was 100% genuine. And she was intentionally trying to give me pause. It was her way of lovingly saying, "You're assuming intent. You're on the wrong track.
Yeah, back off a little bit." Yeah.
And I love her for that.
Yeah. If you can surround yourself with people who can recognize that in yourself, especially from a leadership perspective, then you can grow just as much, and that's something really valuable. We're going to just pause because we're about to lose a battery on one, and then depending on how you guys are doing for time, we can
10 minutes, 15 minutes, 10 minutes? Or 5 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, it can go as long as you want. So just let me pause, and we'll be right back.
When is it the right time to say it's not working? We've talked about before the idea that no offense or no dysfunction is worth mentioning right in the moment, because whatever you struggle with is going to come out and it's going to be received that way. We've talked about that. So what do we do? We write it down. We talk about it later. Whatever helps you talk about it later, that's what you do. You don't address the thing in the moment. We've talked before about, well, aren't there some things that you've got to address right then? You just have to. And for you mentioned patient safety,
right,
in your field. I don't really have one where we don't have anything that's that detrimental to, I have a restaurant. I mean, if you're yelling at a customer, like, we're going to address that, but that never happens. So when, kind of along that line, when do you say this isn't working? It's not a good fit. God forbid that should happen, because that would be, a shortcoming on leadership's end, not recognizing that ahead of time. But when is enough enough? How do you approach that? What do you do? How do you go about that kind of conflict?
The segue is patient safety. You're right. You can't do harm. So that would be a time to jump in immediately. That is a lot less than what I would fess up to. It would be easy to convince myself of that as an enabler to jump in. So I have to be very careful in that becoming an enabler. To answer your question, I always go to what great looks like is they will decide themselves. That's what great looks like, because the environment, the teammates will have already talked with them. They will already have sorted it out. Now, great doesn't happen usually. So you have to help them understand that. And sometimes in that communication, maybe I'll understand it's not where we thought it is, and there's still hope. And then sometimes it helps it move to where they decide to move on. And if they don't decide and it's right for them to move on, then you have to decide. But that's a whole lot less than what I thought it was too. Mm-hmm. But if the environment's there, it's a very difficult thing to do, because you're impacting someone's livelihood there and their life. But if I follow all the steps, it becomes okay for the teammate, mm-hmm. because something's out of alignment there where it's not working out. They're better off for themselves probably doing something else.
Right.
But usually you're in that position because you don't have that common understanding, and you're not able to get to that point. Mm-hmm. That's where, you have the responsibility to take care of the team. And sometimes that means not having a particular teammate on the team. Yeah. It doesn't happen, fortunately, a lot.
Right.
If I either own that I've hired someone incorrectly, where there wasn't alignment and I thought there was, and I need to look at how I'm identifying the right people on the front end, or something happened along the way that I own, the teammate owns, we both own, and it's always a mix of all those things, and that's why it's so difficult and complicated. But a lot of times you arrive at that space and you need to make a tough decision. What brought you there may only matter in the context of you minimizing the likelihood of that happening again, because you're in that space. And, that's just hard reality, but it's reality nonetheless.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. When the system is working as the system should, then not your business's system, but this leadership system, when it's working the way that it should, these problems are largely avoided.
They are. And they'll opt out. And the team will help them. Mm-hmm. And at the hospital here, I worked with a great team that they functioned that way, and they operated at a high level. Yeah. And it was more me consulting and supporting the decisions they make. If they would ask me for help, I would ask them what they thought, and ask them for possible solutions, and it's guided self-discovery. I try to help them formulate how they should make the decision. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't want to be in space where I'm telling them what to do. And if you're in space where you have to tell someone what to do when they're a tenured teammate, it's usually that kind of scenario where the fit probably isn't right.
Yeah. Well, we've heard lots of good things about what's been going on at the hospital for the last, how long has it been? 3 years? 2 years?
2.5 years.
2.5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but you're moving on, and you want to tell us a little bit about where you and Janice are headed?
We are heading to Onega, Kansas, which is about 80 miles northwest of Kansas City. And I was fortunate. I will be the chief executive officer there. And
congratulations.
Thanks. And I feel the appropriate weight of the responsibility of the environment that I am responsible for. And, I'll work hard not to lose sight of that. I think hopefully if I can put some of what we've been talking about today into practice, we'll be in good shape. It's a good group of people. This current CEO there is retiring after 10 years. And I can't wait to get started.
They have no idea how lucky they are to have you.
Yeah.
I appreciate
From the
that.
things I hear, that's exactly it. It's just the culture just seems to flip when these practices are implemented. And that's what we've heard. So that's
your
remarkable.
ability to cultivate a culture is, I've learned the most about that from you than I have anybody in my entire life. And you're just a great example. What do you do for fun, Kerry?
I appreciate your kind words. I love to run. So I grew up playing soccer.
Okay.
With three brothers, we played all the sports. I focused in on soccer and never really liked running for running's sake. Because
Join the club.
I played soccer every day, and I did every day. I had a ball and was doing something. And then as I've gotten older, I cycled. I
Okay.
road
Getting
raced.
better. This is getting better.
So I loved that.
It must be for real. You called it cycling.
Yeah, that's how you know. That's how you know somebody's really into it.
You cycled.
And we lived in Louisville, Kentucky, and there was a great cycling community there, and I really got into it. But you have to cycle about 3 times longer time-wise and distance than running for the same kind of fitness, and I just ran out of time.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Right.
And when we moved to Arizona 13 years ago or so, I just started running by default just for time constraint reasons. And you talked about Zen. I ran for about an hour earlier today, and that's an hour of quiet time that I never appreciated quiet time. My wife always has appreciated it, and I'm just now beginning to understand, be still. And I am able to feel that when I run. And so I love to run. It's great fitness, and it just gives me a great sense of things. It helps me blow off steam. It helps me recharge. Helps me think without thinking. And so I ran ultra marathons for a few years.
No kidding.
I did, yeah.
Say
Another
what?
half an hour to talk about?
Yeah.
That is, we can get into that.
It taught me that you can do anything.
Wow.
And you can, if you keep practicing, you can run a little longer. And I've run one 50-mile race and several 50K mountain races. And I never thought I could do that, but we can do anything. And I loved having to plot out what the goal is and then work backwards on what it takes to get there. And I have so many great memories, and I've been to great places throughout the Western United States in particular, on trails and on mountains and, at 11,000 feet of elevation. And, it teaches me also to work through distress. And every one of those races, even 50K, it's 31 miles. There's a lot of elevation climbing. You cannot avoid distress when you're running for 4 to 8 hours.
Right.
It is unavoidable. And for a period of time, I was trying to train to avoid that, and it's unavoidable.
Yeah.
And
Right.
isn't life like that? And it's just how I would get through that distress that more defined me than anything else. And I'm I'm an old man running today. There's distress now. And I run very slow, but it has taught me a lot about life.
Yeah. That is something to ponder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Putting yourself through voluntary distress actually, rewires your brain in a lot of ways, because you can start to understand the pain that way. When you're in situations where you're put into stress involuntarily, you will have a different reaction than you might otherwise have had. So, and I know, I love that.
You know what you love even more?
Cold plunging.
In that, yeah, in that theory, it doesn't work the next day. You have to stress your brain in a different way or worse way to get the same level of effect. That's what's fascinating, is it has to get worse to have the same benefit.
It's true.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Those are two great thoughts. And I think, I come into your beautiful studio and I'm always fascinated. It took work, and it took methodical work just to build the corner, this wall, and to play the drums. I am a hack drummer, by the way.
Okay, well,
just to play drums takes a consistent commitment and effort, or to lift weights. You have a great gym here. It does tell me a lot about how you think and how your brain's wired, and it's worthy of respect. And we visited my brothers this 2 weekends ago in Pennsylvania before we move. We may not see him for a while. And my younger brother plays the guitar. He's rhythm guitar mostly.
Yep.
And he is so committed to that craft. It's so impressive to me to see a commitment. And that's why I love hearing your background, and just to better understand how you can do this. It's doing a little bit each day. The other thought I have too, with running, and I was never very good, but I finished some races well. I did, and you have to fight off bad thoughts, right?
Yeah.
And it's easy. It would be easy for someone to say, well, look, you're 6'1", you're 157 pounds. Of course you can run.
Right.
And, but they don't know that I was 210 pounds, and I've run 55, 60 miles a week for the last 2 years, and have done speed training twice a week. And it's not for me to tell anyone that. It requires, like playing the drums, like what you've done with the studio, daily consistent effort. And that is impressive to me. And I know what that looks like. It looks like this environment. And that's what leadership is too. It's that daily effort. And I love that challenge of picking myself back up when I fall, because that's daily. Right? You're not going to play the drums the way you want to each day, or you're going to have an off day lifting. And, I didn't feel great today running, but I did it. And tomorrow I'm going to do it again. And, I think we're supposed to go through those things.
Yeah. And I think it's like you said, when somebody's looking at you and saying, oh, it's easy for you to run, it's easy for this, they don't know what's going on in your mind, number one. And number two, there's something to suffering in silence when people don't know what your progression looks like or what your routine looks like to help you get through those negative thoughts. Because for me, long distance stuff like that makes me nervous, and I'm like, oh, it sounds like it'd be fun to accomplish, but I'll never do it. But more recently, I've been trying to break that. I've been biking a lot, and I think I'm going to start getting into shorter runs to start. But I've always been like a sprint guy, not a long distance guy. But yeah, so we were talking to our guest last night, Corwin. I don't know if you know him, but we were talking about discipline over motivation and how discipline is supposed to kick in when you're unmotivated. And so it's kind of all what you're touching on. It is very fascinating.
I think about that a lot too. And Tom Brady, I respect and appreciate, and he always downplays his talent. He's more talented than he says. And he's not the most talented quarterback there ever was. but he is one of the most disciplined ones, and it's the daily effort, and his discipline has made him great. And, that teaches me a lot. I think their talent certainly helps, but the big variable is discipline. And, I can make a big impact if I'm disciplined. And for me, discipline looks like what we've been talking about. For me, mostly it's restraint. If I'm disciplined, I'm restrained. And I need to get a good night. I need to get 8 hours of sleep to be disciplined. I need to run each day. I need to eat better. I need to eat less licorice, and I'm working on that. Less sweets. And, if I'm disciplined, I can pull these things off and be better.
Yeah. And you start to see your potential a little bit, because you were saying that we're so capable of more than we could possibly imagine in a real sense, because if, 10 years ago or before you started running consistently, whenever that was, if you were to tell your future self, I could never do that, and then your future self to say, I've run 50 miles up a mountain, then I think that the consistency is what brings that to bear. And then you realize during that process, I can pretty much do whatever I put my mind towards. And the capacity for people, and this is what I love about managing people a little bit, is that a lot of unrealized potential is in them, and trying to find a way to show them that you can do anything that you want to do, and you are it's up to you.
Yeah, you're your biggest detractor. And what you said that is fundamentally what leadership is. It's freeing people up to see that and understand it. And that is a great thought. And it's so real. And we're all God's children if they catch even a glimpse of that. I used to drink, and I was never a heavy drinker, but I went through college and I drank, and that's what we did. And I do not drink now. I haven't had a drink of alcohol for 12 years or so. And I don't preach about that. It's just for me. For me, even if I had a beer or two a night or a beer or two a week, it numbs that for me. And it numbs my ability to remember that I'm a child of God and I have that potential that each of us has. And that's part of me being disciplined. And I shortchanged, everyone has their own path. For me, I shortchanged myself that way. And I don't look back with regret. I look back to try to learn from my personal mistakes. But that's where everybody's different. Mm-hmm. And, this is probably the first time I've talked about that with drinking. It's very personal, and it's me.
Right.
My path. Mm-hmm. Everyone has their path.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kerry.
Thank you.
Thank you for being
here.
I can't. The fact that maybe someday more than 3 people will get to hear you speak it's huge for me. You're a walking self-help book, but you're so much more than that too. Just to get an hour of your wisdom is such a privilege. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's my pleasure, Nick.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Hopefully when you're back again sometime. It feels like I missed out on some of those meetings that I wish I would have been in, but just trying to be a sponge because you have so much to offer. Just such good stuff, and anybody who watches this can take something from it.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. We'll miss you, and good luck in Kansas.
Miss you too.
Kansas, right?
Kansas, yes.
Yes.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All right, that's it. See you next time, everybody.